Good afternoon. I will call to order the April 10th meeting of the Minneapolis City Planning Commission. My name is Matt Brown. I serve as president of the commission. I'm joined today by Commissioners Bender, Slack, Sweezy, Luke-Pierre, Vreeland, and Rockwell. Our first item in business is to approve the actions from the March 20th meeting. May I have a motion to approve those actions? We have a motion and a second. All in favor? That motion carries. Our next item in business is to approve the agenda. You can find hard copies of the agenda in the hallway. We'll determine which items we will consider on consent and which items we will discuss. So starting at the top, item 1 is 212 James Avenue North and 208 through 226 Irving Avenue North. That is a final plat. Is anyone wishing to speak in opposition to or modify the staff recommendation on item 1? Seeing no one, we'll put that on consent. Item 2 is at 4164 Edmond Boulevard. That is a minor subdivision. We'll discuss item 2, and just so I have a sense, is there anyone wishing to speak on that item? There isn't anyone, but we'll discuss it nonetheless. Item 3 is the Thor headquarters at 1256 Penn Avenue North and 1235 through 1243 Oliver Avenue North. Several applications, or 2 applications, modifying a previously approved site plan. There is anyone wishing to speak in opposition to or modify the staff recommendation on item 3? Seeing no one, we'll put that on consent. Item 4 is Minnehaha Crossing at 2900 through 2912 28th Avenue South and 2913 through 2941 26th Avenue South. Several applications for some new uses in an existing building there. Is anyone wishing to speak in opposition to or modify the staff recommendation on item 4? So we'll discuss item 4. Item 5 is the North Loop Office Building at 419 Washington Avenue North. Several applications for a new office building there. Is anyone wishing to speak in opposition to or modify the staff recommendation on item 5? Seeing no one, we'll put item 5 on consent. And finally, item 6 is 14th Avenue and Marshall Street Northeast at 1319, 1321, and 1327 Marshall Street Northeast, and 108 and 114 14th Avenue Northeast. Several applications for a new multifamily building there. We'll discuss item 6, and again, so I have a sense, is anyone wishing to speak on item 6? So a few people. So we'll discuss that item. So our agenda as amended is as follows. Items 1, 3, and 5 will be on consent, and we will discuss items 2, 4, and 6. May I have a motion to approve the agenda as amended? We have a motion and a second. All in favor? And that motion carries. Our next item is the Committee of the Whole consent agenda, and Vice President Slack, do you have an update for us?
Thank you, President Brown. Sorry here. At the March 23rd, 2017 Committee of the Whole, we heard one presentation. It was a series of land acquisitions for 3250 6th Street North and 3943 6th Street North, and the recommended motion was to approve the staff report that the item was consistent with the Minneapolis Plan for Sustainable Growth.
All right, I'll take that as a motion to find that those acquisitions are consistent with the comprehensive plan. Is there a second? We have a motion and a second. All in favor? And that motion carries. Next, we will move on to the public hearing portion of our meeting. And at this time, I'll open the public hearing for the items on the consent agenda. Again, that is items 1, 3, and 5. Is there anyone who would like to speak on items 1, 3, or 5? Seeing no one, I will close the public hearing and may have a motion to approve the consent agenda. We have a motion and a second. All in favor? And that motion carries. Next, we'll move on to our first item for discussion, and that is item 2, 4164 Edmond Boulevard, and staff is Ms. Widmeyer.
Good evening. The subject property is zoned R1. It's also located in the Mississippi River Critical Area Overlay District, and part of the site is also in the Shoreline Overlay District. That would just be the quarterly easterly portion of it. This is a predominantly single-family area. We do have the Mississippi to the east. The existing use or property is over 31,000 square feet in area. There's an existing single-family home on the site, and what they're proposing to do is to split the lot into two. So there would be one parcel on the north end that would be almost 21,800 square feet in area, and then a second parcel would be created to the south, and that's just under 9,500 square feet in area. And the existing house is proposed to remain, and then the proposal would be to construct a new single-family dwelling on the second parcel. So for this proposal, a minor subdivision is required, and that is because the proposed lot line here would not be overlapping an underlying platted lot line. You can see the nearest one is close to that existing house. So that's the only reason that we need this application. Just to follow up from our last meeting, which this was originally scheduled for, it was continued because we received some information about a restrictive covenant that was specific to this addition that the site is located in. And that the information also included a planning commission resolution that was related to subdivisions. So we had just asked for some additional time to look into that to see what, if any, impacts there would be to this subdivision request. So also, since the last meeting, the applicant did a title search, and they found that these restrictive covenants also applied to this property, but found no reference to the Planning Commission resolution. And both of those documents, by the way, we attached those to the staff report, so if you wanted to look at them, they're there for reference. So pertaining to the restrictive covenant, the city doesn't enforce those. Those are private agreements. And with the Planning Commission resolution, staff consulted the city attorney's office, and what was concluded was that that resolution just generally applied to subdivisions. It wasn't specific to this addition that the site is located in. So we've had amendments to our subdivision ordinance since that resolution occurred in the 1970s. And what we do is we apply the current ordinance. So that's how this subdivision was reviewed. And in looking at the findings, staff did find that all the findings were met, and we're recommending approval. So I'll just run through those findings. This found that the subdivision is in conformance with the subdivision ordinance, the zoning code, and comprehensive plan. The analysis was completed to ensure that the larger parcel will comply with all of the zoning code requirements for that remaining structure. So no issues were identified there. Also, in the subdivision ordinance, there are requirements that need to be met there, including one such requirement for lot width. Because there's no alley access here, it needs to be a little bit wider. That requirement is met. Moving on to the next finding, they're not expected to have any adverse impacts on the surrounding area. Both of these lots, again, will be used for single-family dwelling. That's not out of character with this area and would not add significant congestion to this area either. Next finding, we found that there would be no significant impediments to developing the new lot. So this site is relatively flat. It's also not prone to flooding or erosion, and there's no steep slopes that exist on the site or rock formations. Some of those hazards noted. We did find, though, that there's a high water table that exists in this area, but that's a condition that we find elsewhere in the city. You can still build a structure there, but you just have to make sure you're complying with building code requirements, and that would be required of any new structure. Utility easements we also look for. There's a reference to a utility easement at the rear of the site. We know that there's a Met Council sanitary sewer that clips the site, but most of the site is open for development, so nothing significant to restrict development there. Lastly, looking at stormwater runoff, again, that's not expected to increase significantly. There's going to be a soil and erosion permit required for new development. Excuse me. So yeah, we found no issues here and are recommending approval.
All right. Are there any questions of staff, Commissioner? Well, we'll open the public hearing in a minute. Janelle, I do have one question. Can you just clarify for me at what point in the lot the city measures lot width from. I was reading through those covenants, and I realized, again, those aren't something we can necessarily enforce. It wasn't really clear in those where the lot width is measured, but maybe you can help me understand where the city would measure that.
Absolutely. The lot width is measured at the front yard setback requirement. So with this being located in the R1 district, that setback requirement is 25 feet. So there, that minimum width requirement is 60 feet, and that's what's shown here, and that's what they're meeting.
Okay. If there are no further questions, I'll open the public hearing on this item. I'd like to ask the applicant to speak first. If someone is here on behalf of the applicant. Okay. Are you speaking on behalf of the applicant, or?
I've been helping him on that.
Okay. Then you can, why don't you come to the microphone and state your name and address for the record. And if there is anything you'd like to add to the staff's presentation.
My name is Travis Erickson.
You can speak at the center microphone.
Travis Erickson. I'm the applicant's real estate agent. I think Janelle stated it all pretty well. In terms of any sort of concerns we may have heard, it's basically just mirroring, not really changing the appeal from the front of the house or from the river road. And when you draw that new line in there, and this is kind of, you saw the one she had was a little better, but it kind of, this lot had quite a bit larger than any of the other lots on Edmond. And so now it's just kind of making it, it's still going to be larger than most, but just making it more mirrored. This is going to be similar to the lot right next to it.
Okay.
And then they did mention in the covenant that you needed to have 100-foot lot depth, and we've far exceeded that in 6,000 square feet, and it's far exceeding that. It doesn't really mention in the Llewellyn-Anderson covenant the width, but what it will have in the back is going to be farther wider than a lot of lots that are already in Llewellyn-Anderson. It'll be 42.9, and here you can see here's one that's 42.64. It doesn't meet what that one that was brought up that wasn't found to be part of the Llewellyn-Anderson where it said 58. And there's throughout the neighborhood, there's some even in the front yard that are only 50. Here's one that the lot is 38 at the back, so we're surpassing that. In terms of, all the setbacks will have to be met, obviously, for what the city requires. But in terms of spacing between houses, it's going to be very fitting for the neighborhood. You can see there's not a ton of room between. So this is the neighbor to the south of the lot, and the house, this is a corner house. There's not a lot of space between those two homes, so it's not really going to change the look and feel of the neighborhood. Same thing. Here's another one on the block. They're fairly close together, and this will be likely even further apart than that. And it kind of, here's my house. I live in the neighborhood. It's almost further than some of the ones on Edmond. It's on 43rd Avenue. We're apart. So in terms of just changing the look and feel of the neighborhood, there shouldn't be any issues there.
All right. Are there any questions of the applicant? If there are none, we can move on to some other speakers. And I know we have at least one other person who would like to speak on this item. If you don't mind coming to the microphone and state your name and address for the record.
Good afternoon. My name is Steve Heinrich. Thank you for allowing me to address the committee. And my address is 4147 Kaufman Lane. It would be through the backyards of the proposed subdivision. I just have a couple questions, and hopefully, if we can answer them here, you just reply back maybe in the meeting minutes. Question about a violation, if there is a violation of the covenants, and it looks like the new city zoning ordinances they're aligned with the covenants. But what is the redress if there is a violation of the covenants? I'm just curious.
Okay. Well, I might, if you have other questions or comments, maybe you could ask them to us, and then I'll ask staff for clarification on that.
With the subdivision, there's an existing structure on the property. Will that existing structure still meet the coverage restrictions as far as once you divide that lot, will it exceed the coverage limitations as far as what the planning allows houses to do in that area. Because if you have an aerial photo, you see there's a fairly large house, there's a lot of paved area, there's a separate garage, and there's a detached indoor pool on the existing property. Another question that I have is there is I think Janelle mentioned there was a high water table in the neighborhood, and there is a storm sewer that runs through the backyard, and it wasn't clear if that goes all the way to the utility access behind the proposed subdivided lot. And in our conversations, email conversations with Janelle, she said that the city had no record of the storm sewer, and we did some research. It looked like that may have been something that the developer installed. I don't know. This was in 1961. I don't know how much involvement the city would have had with the installation of that storm sewer. It looks like the neighbors pooled their money and paid to have a storm drain put in the backyard because, as you see, there's no alley, no place for an existing storm drain. And then the lot width requirement, I saw in the covenant that it was 58 feet, and I understand that the city measures from the setback from the street, and it looks like it's going to meet that requirement. I don't know if there's any restrictions on the width of the backside of the lot. So that would be one of my questions. Can the lot, it's a pie-shaped lot, can it just narrow down to whatever?
It can, yes.
Okay, all right. So then my questions would be, what is the coverage area? There's an existing structure with the subdivision of lot. What happens to the coverage area? Does it need to meet those requirements of a new structure?
Commissioners, I can respond to that.
yeah.
That the structure that will remain on the lot being subdivided off would have to meet all standards related to lot coverage, impervious surface, setbacks, et cetera. They can't put themselves out of compliance with any of those general standards.
Okay, and that is, I don't know if anyone has looked at that. Is that something that this group would look at?
We would certainly look at that if they haven't already.
Okay.
I assume that there's been some analysis of that
Okay,
already.
that'd be great. And maybe before the final approval, if we could see some information about that compliance, that'd be great.
Sure.
All right. And then the question about the storm sewer that the city doesn't have a record of. One of my neighbors told me today that there was a city inspector out there actually looking at some of the drains. And so I think there might be some information that's forthcoming as far as what exists back there, even if it's not on the city planners' plats. If it was installed by the neighbors back in the early 60s, at least you'd have record of it. And if this new homeowner, I don't even know if they'd be allowed to take advantage of it, because I know nowadays it's keep it in the yard. Is that right? I mean, we try to limit the amount of runoff that we have.
It would be, Mr. Wittenberg, I assume that if there was some type of private storm drain back there, there may not be an easement over it, but
Okay.
I think the staff can certainly look into that. So
Okay, just something
appreciate the
that
comment.
your group should be aware of. All right, that's all my questions. Thank you.
Okay,
Yep.
well, thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak on item 2? Seeing no one, I will close the public hearing. And commissioners, we just have the one application before us, the minor subdivision. Would someone like to start us off with a motion? Commissioner Breland, yes, absolutely.
I think some of the questions could be answered by Jeanette about the about the existing house.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thanks for clarifying. And to the speaker, I might just ask Janelle if you don't mind connecting with the speaker afterwards. That might not hurt, just to clarify some of those things. So I don't know if you had anything you'd like to add right now.
Yeah, on the survey, it does reference the existing hardcover, and those calculations were verified. So the maximum lot coverage is 40%. They're at maybe about 30%. I don't recall the exact numbers, but then impervious surface maximum is 60%, and they're at 43.5%. So well below on both of those.
Okay, thanks for clarifying. All right, are there any further questions, or would someone like to make a motion? Commissioner Slack.
I'll move staff recommendation, item A for minor subdivision.
All right, we have a motion and a second to approve the minor subdivision. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Bender.
Aye.
Cronzer.
Aye.
Hipke-Peer.
Aye.
Rockwell.
Aye.
Slack.
Aye.
Sweezy. Aye. Freeland.
Aye.
7-0.
All right, and that motion carries. That concludes our discussion on item 2. So our next item for discussion is item 4, Minnehaha Crossing, and staff is Mr. Hanauer. I believe we just had one speaker on this, so we could have a quick presentation.
So, Chair and Commissioners, the 4 applications for the school addition for the former Rainbow School site near Lake Street. And just an aerial showing the proximity to the Lake Street and the light rail station. We have that rezoning for a small portion of the site. It's split zoned, what the applicant owns, that being most of it C3S, but you do have a little C1 and C3A. The conditional use permit for the school, a couple variances to allow a new parking lot, a 21-space parking lot at the northeast corner of the site, and then site plan review. There was that one application for exceeding the maximum parking allowance for the lot that was returned because the entire site has reduced the amount of parking by 6 spaces. There was a number of public comments received at the last minute concerned with wanting more development for the site, and definitely realize that the current conditions are a lot of parking, and that's what the applicant was left with when they bought the property within the year. I just point out the positives of the project. They are reusing, they're looking to bring activity and reusing the existing building. I'm going to point out, as far as building improvements, here's the 28th Avenue elevation, or the north elevation, and here's showing both the north elevation and the east elevation. Existing conditions. The proposal at that intersection brings a lot more windows, a lot more activity. They're reducing the amount of concrete block for the building. As far as site improvements, the applicant's looking to add at least 90 bike parking spaces. We encourage them. They have one bike parking place area designated here, but we encourage them to have bike parking throughout the site. They are proactively proposing to add interior landscaping with tree islands, more green space for the entire site, more trees and shrubs. They're mentioned to reduce the amount of parking for the entire project area. And then we saw it as important to note that they're reducing the amount of curb cut or the drive aprons along 20th Avenue where you may have pedestrian traffic walking to the school. And in addition to what the applicant's proposing, CPED's recommending more pedestrian lighting along walkways in the building, more trees and more landscaping. And then the applicant's proposing a mechanical box near here. And we're recommending that it either be encouraged that the applicant look at different locations or to artistically wrap that to improve that front entrance or front area of the building. With the 4 applications, CPED made the findings recommending that the findings are there to support all the applications the applicants requested. So, that sums up the presentation.
All right, thank you. And commissioners, are there any questions of staff? Seeing none, I'll open the public hearing on this item. I'd like to ask the applicant to speak first if anyone is here, and just see if you have anything you'd like to add to the staff presentation.
My name is David Wellington with Wellington Management. We've been working for a while on this project. I think Aaron's presentation really covers quite a bit of what we're trying to drive at here. We are adding additional density to an existing building. We are reducing parking, and we're also reusing the back side of an existing building that's really deep and was originally a 70,000 square foot grocery store that we can't fill with a retail use at this point with the market. We have tried And so this is our creative approach to try to bisect or bifurcate the building so that we can have uses on both sides of the street.
All right, thank you. Are there any questions of the applicant? Commissioner Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We've gotten some questions about this project, like especially in the last day or so, and I had the chance to also check in with the council office. So I think the concern that maybe folks will voice here or have in their emails at least is the kind of overall site. So there's there's the question of parking on the new building or the renovated building, but then there's this much bigger overall site. And so I think the bigger concern overall is what happens to this very large surface parking lot. Can you talk more about that and the future plans? And I think the community just wants some assurance that that's not going to be a giant undeveloped surface parking lot.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity. So this is, from our view, phase one of at least a two-phase, if not a three-phase development for this area. The 6-acre site does have, when we bought it, has had 293 parking stalls, I believe, in that parking field to the west of the Rainbow. If you add up the asphalt that is in front of the Target that's not in the site that we're talking about today, and the Cub and that shopping center across the street, that's the second largest piece of contiguous asphalt in the city of Minneapolis. We think that's atrocious in a pedestrian overlay, and we have plans to densify that piece of the parking lot that we do control. We have submitted grant applications to Met Council for approximately 100-unit senior affordable housing project that would be in the northwest corner of that main parking field. And that would be 15,000 square feet of retail on the main floor and 5 stories of housing above it. We're weighing whether or not we would go underground with parking on that. We are planning to submit land use applications on that later this summer. Part of what's driving our bifurcation of the land use applications is that we are working to try to get the charter school in for the fall school year. And so that's why we had to separate them out and why it doesn't feel like you have a full site plan that you're dealing with.
Okay, are there any further questions of the applicant? Hearing none, we can move on to some other speakers. So anyone who would like to speak on item 4, yes, please come to the microphone and state your name and address for the record.
Hello, thank you everyone. My name is Fred Kreider. I live at 2832 20th Avenue South. Thank you. That's good to hear the longer developments. I heard about it in the Star Tribune, and I'm glad that there is more in development. Me and my wife, we own a duplex at that address. We decided to purchase the property because of the growth in Minneapolis and seeing the growth potential in parking lots, especially those so close to transit. Since Rainbow vacated the area, I started to have the interest in development and like seeking out, wanting to see more things. I wanted to live in a truly urban neighborhood outside of being in downtown. I'm happy to hear about the about the development on the Rainbow property. I'm less happy about the parking lots. I have a hard time seeing justification in planting trees when there will be future redevelopment. I think that trees are something that you don't take for granted, and that you plant and they grow and they don't go away unless a storm or a car runs into them. I think there is a lot of parking. I would ultimately prefer for just the Rainbow site to be adjusted. That I want much more development. I want to see in my neighborhood, in my backyard, what is happening on the west side of Hiawatha with the Hennepin County building and the permanent farmers market. Also where the house